Aye.
Short Bus Debate Club. It's a bus rolling.
I can get on board. Hello, I'm Darren Jolly.
It's time to get this short bus started. So let's roll and on with the show. Everyone, this is Brian Courtney with Short Bus Debate Club. Thanks for joining the show. As always, Darren Jolly's across the table from me.
Hi.
And today we have another special guest. We've got Jack Ternan with the American Solidarity Party. And we're going to talk about he is the outreach director and a member of the national committee. And we're going to talk politics and see if maybe the American Solidarity Party has something that you guys are looking for. Thanks for joining, Jack.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So I feel like that's the 19th time I've said so in like 10 minutes. You want to start?
Yeah. So, Jack, why don't you just give us sort of like a background on what the main idea of the party's platform is?
Sure. So the American Solidarity Party takes its inspiration from movements that are common in Europe and Latin America. It's called Christian democracy. It's basically, Catholic social teaching, variety of Protestant teachings on how to engage in civic life and what's justice, what's subsidiarity, what's solidarity. And we try to take those movements, and they're very common, and they have successful political parties in Europe and Latin America, and try to bring the concept to the United States. We tend to be more right-leaning on things that Christians tend to be right-leaning on, and then left-leaning on things that Christians are left-leaning on. And so you end up with a platform that doesn't fit very well in the normal American political discourse. We're pro-life for the whole life. So, we're against abortion and against capital punishment and in favor of universal health care. We love the environment. We want to protect it. We think that economic justice is important. It's a unique combination of policies in the American context, but very common elsewhere in the world.
So is it fair to say, and forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but would you say that from a social standpoint, you guys have a tendency to be more on the right, and from an economic standpoint, you have a tendency to be more on the left? Or am I getting that all wrong?
No, to the extent that right and left actually means something, you've got it right. We'd be called social conservatives on issues that are, of a social nature. And then on economics, we're often considered more progressive or left, depending on what those words mean to you.
Do you have any sort of thoughts? Because you said Christian democracy, like in Latin America, is there any sort of connection to the liberation theology stuff with Oscar Romero at all? Or is that too outside?
That would be a source of inspiration, certainly for parts of our party. Christianity has always been a movement that's been very popular amongst the working class, and liberation theology was a particular movement in Latin America in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. And I would say that yes, that's part of the broader global movement of which we are a part.
Okay. Did you see a lot of these movements in Europe and South America grow when a lot of countries started closing down their borders to refugees from other countries, whether they be on the same continent or not? Or is that something that is completely unrelated?
So Christian democracy in Europe emerged in the 1800s as sort of a response to now we've got sort of democracy as a popular thing. How do we as Christians engage in the democratic process, right? And how do we engage with these radical changes in the economy where we're no longer an agrarian economy, right? Where we've got a lot of people living in urban environments, and the concentration of capital has become extreme. How do we respond to that? And, you know, for most of the 1800s, you know, Christian Democrats weren't really in charge anywhere. But after World War II, in a lot of places in Europe, the Christian Democrats were the ones that were actually in charge. So like the Christian Democratic Union in Germany, for instance, you know, sort of constructed the post-war Germany. And, you know, and you saw them, you know, in Italy and, you know, the Netherlands and Scandinavia. You know, a lot of what people mistakenly call socialist in this country and they mislabel Europe as socialist. It's actually not. It's Christian democracy. It's sort of a mix of private property, market-based system with social protections, a social safety net, and a sort of attempt to have fair economic transactions so that one side isn't overly in control of the situation. And so, you know, Latin America, really Christian democracy started about a couple decades later, more like a 1960s, 1970s sort of thing. But some of the Christian democratic parties, like for instance in Mexico, the National Action Party, which you may remember Vicente Fox in the 2000s. You know, they started all the way back in 1939. And they took their inspiration from the same sort of sources that were common in Europe. So they've, you know, how it manifests in a particular country it varies, but these sort of movements and parties are common in the Western world.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So you kind of talked about the, you know, the social protections and the safety net. Question number two, you know, we're asking all of the parties to kind of rank what you would change if you actually had the power to change these things, in order of importance, I guess, or what's important to you guys. So if you took Social Security, the environment, education, healthcare, foreign policy, and the U.S. economy, and you had the power to resolve those things, which would you do first and which would you do last?
Sure. You know, I'm not sure that, you know, you can really separate out or prioritize these things. They're all sort of interconnected, you know, but in an attempt to answer the question, and I don't know that you get the same answer from everybody in the party, you know, I think foreign policy would probably be first and Social Security would probably be last, not because they are necessarily, that's the way you'd rank them in importance, but just the order of how you would need to go about tackling the problems, in the sense that foreign policy, we have a very aggressive foreign policy in this country that's very expensive. And if you want to tackle the environment or a lot of our economic problems, you really need to promote peace and, you know, reduce our military spending and, you know, shore up some of our trade issues on some important resources. And then Social Security, while it's obviously very, very important, you know, it's not going to go broke until 2030. So we've got some time. So
Loads.
So you know, Social Security is a fairly fixable problem if you tackle the other stuff first, right? If you stop spending crazy amounts of money on your military, if you sort of rebalance your economy so that you're not sort of privileging the fire sector and you know, real estate and the banks and finance, and you know, start focusing on productive economic activities. You know, Social Security is a very easy problem to solve if you have the political will. But I think it's sort of downstream and, you know, a little bit less urgent.
So being that we have, you know, bases like literally all over the planet, can you elaborate a little bit more? I mean, you said sort of like creating a peace policy, maybe instead of a war policy. Can you elaborate a little bit more on like how concretely what that would look like, I guess? Like where does the UN play into it? You know, how do you, because I mean, for all intents and purposes, U.S. foreign policy, like the welfare state, the financial position was constructed. Somebody could argue that it's constructed on a war policy that we've maintained since World War II. Like, how do you sort of? I mean, I get the idea of trying to reallocate resources by making our military investments smaller, but just a little bit more specifically.
Well, sure. I mean, from a foreign policy perspective, the United States came out of World War II in a utterly dominant position, and we sort of built the international order that we liked, and we sort of bossed everybody around, and everybody sort of caught up to us, and we don't have that level of dominance anymore, but we're still trying to act like we do. And as a result, we're overthrowing governments. We are trying to bully countries to do our will. And we really just can't afford to do that, and we can't succeed in doing that. And so we need to cut back on our commitments where we're not really wanted. We need to find a way to allow Russia and China and a proportionate influence in the international system rather than trying to shut them out. And we need to do a better job of allowing, fair trade between countries. And, if we try to do those things, we don't need to have the same number of bases. We don't need to be able to put troops in a country in a moment's notice. And, that's just cheaper. But I think you can save money on the military, even if you didn't withdraw from all the bases, right? I mean, we buy ships that don't work for billions of dollars. We develop airplanes we don't need anymore when drones are cheaper and just as effective. A lot of military spending is not to actually be combat ready. It's to feed the military industrial complex. And, I think if you had a peaceful foreign policy and you got serious about reducing military spending, you could probably cut it in half.
That's a good answer.
Just one other thing in relation to it, though. So then if it were tomorrow, like how would you deal with the Ukraine issue?
Well, there's differences of opinion on how to deal with that. I mean, obviously, you want to try to get the best deal you can for the Ukrainians. We've already invested so much into them. But I don't personally see any way that we're going to push Russia out of the territories it's already taken. So, I mean, I think you try to negotiate some sort of ceasefire for where things currently are, and maybe you can negotiate around the edges somewhere. That's probably the best outcome you can get. In this party, we believe in in just war theory, right? And yeah, and one of the requirements of just war obviously is just cause, and I think the Ukrainians have that. But you also have to have a reasonable prospect of success, because if you don't have a reasonable prospect of success, you're just getting people killed for really no reason. And I think that's the element where the continuation of the war is not just.
So I actually had the opportunity to watch one of your debates. Very, very interesting. Could you sort of go into how it is that you pick or went through the process of like nominating the person that's going to be the 2024 candidate? I know I got that somewhere, Peter something.
Yeah, Peter Sonsky.
Pardon?
Peter Sonsky.
Yeah. Okay. So what does that process look like? What does it look like on the lower levels?
Sure. So for presidential nominees, obviously that's a national activity. And we have dues-paying members all over the country. And our process for nominating a candidate for president was the members get to vote. It was a ranked vote method, but Peter Sonsky got 52% on the first round out of 5 candidates. So we didn't need to do any ranking. But that was the methodology. So, we had, several debates. We had various information sources passed around the party on the various candidates, and there was a vote, and Peter won.
Do you know roughly how many dues-paying members there are? And you got a lot of followers on Twitter, that's for sure, or X, whatever the heck they want to call it now.
I do, but that is not something we share publicly.
Okay, cheers.
Okay. So I just have a quick follow-up question, and that is, do you guys use the ranked choice voting at like the state and local level as well?
It varies by state. So, for instance, in Texas, we do not, but we do it by convention, and we elect, members to a state committee, and then the members of the state committee elect their officers. But some states do ranked choice voting for things. We've not had really contested primaries or the like for people running for public office, right? I mean, when we've got multiple people willing to run, we make sure that they run in different spots. There's no reason to burn two candidates for one office. But at some point, we probably will have ranked choice voting for candidates for public office. It just hasn't been an issue so far.
Well, that's fair. I just asked the question because I mean everybody is pushing for ranked choice voting. I mean, if you're in a political discussion pretty much anywhere, I'm willing to bet that it comes up if the conversation lasts more than 15 or 20 minutes.
Particularly if you're talking about parties that are not, that exist outside the duopoly, because it opens up that space, obviously. So
yeah. So what we have national conventions every year, and we have delegates elected either from regions or states, depending on how many members they have in a particular state. If they have enough members as a state, they can do as a state. If not, states are grouped together in regions.
Mhm.
And we use a single transferable vote method that they use in Ireland for those elections. And so it essentially allows every differing faction or group to sort of push their person, and they can get, nobody gets shut out, basically.
So what is that method? Explain. I'm not. That's a new one for me.
Yeah, it's difficult to describe, but so you rank people just like you do in ranked choice voting. But for instance, Texas, we had 3 delegates, right? And so if somebody gets enough first place votes to win, then you could theoretically have 3 people all win on the first round, but that's fairly rare, right?
Mhm.
And so when somebody wins, then their votes get part of their vote gets transferred to their second place choice, right? To boost that person's first place count up. And so the consequence of this is that it's difficult for minorities to be completely shut out of the process, but there's still a majoritarian type of feel to it. So it's a methodology that only works when you have multiple people being elected out of a single district. And we've been pretty happy with it. There's some sort of weird technical name for it, but they use it in Ireland, is basically.
But the individual doesn't transfer the vote. It's the party that transfers the vote.
I mean,
Did I understand that right?
It's a mathematical calculation. So yeah, I mean, there is in fact some administrators, but it's mostly done electronically, and then the administrators just sort of check the math to make sure it all worked properly.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify because I'm used to reading like contracts or whatever, the back of a lottery ticket where it says, this isn't transferable. So I just wanted to make sure.
Right. Yeah. So like, there wasn't any decision making by the party officials. It's a formal methodology.
Okay. That kind of makes a nice segue into question number 4, which is, do you guys have a steering committee? And if so, how strictly must the candidates adhere to the party's overall vision?
Sure. So at the national level, we have a national committee. You know, we don't really nominate any candidates nationally other than the president and vice president, and they're elected by the members, so that the national committee doesn't really have any control over that process at all. Though I guess, you know, we have some discretion on how we interact with the campaigns. But you know, so the national committee doesn't really control candidates. Candidates below the president and vice president are endorsed at the state level, and the state committees and state membership have some control over that process. But I would say in general, there are probably some things and some policies where if you're on the wrong side of them from our perspective, you're not going to get nominated. But generally speaking, we're a pretty big tent. You know, there's a lot of varieties of Christianity in this country, and we've got lots of members that are not Christians. You know, plenty of Jews and Muslims and atheists as well. You know, so you know, it's we don't have too many folks that don't get endorsed if they want it.
Fair enough. Thank you.
So you said that you have dues paying members. Does the party get funding from anywhere else, like big donors or anything like that?
You know, it wouldn't shock me if we have some donors that aren't actual dues paying members, but for the most part, our funding comes from dues paying members. Like we don't have any like PACs or organizations or anything that give us funding. It's either our members or friends and members.
You got any follow-up there?
No.
What?
That one's pretty straightforward. So number 6, from the party's perspective, you know, what are some of your goals for the short term, the midterm, and long term?
Yeah, so you know, short term is probably, you know, our 2024 cycle, right? We've got our candidates for president and vice president, Peter Sonsky and Lauren Onak, and you know, we got to get them on the ballot in as many states as possible. And we also, when we can't get on the ballot, do write-in campaigns. And then we're, you know, organizing our candidates for other elective offices too at the state levels. So that's sort of our short-term focus for the next year. Medium term.
Do you know how many state ballots you've gotten the presidential candidate on at this point, or?
You know, I think formally only 3, but that's, I mean, we're fairly early in the process.
Colorado and Vermont are 2 of them, right?
Actually, Colorado, I don't think we're going to make it this cycle.
Really?
Colorado, it used to be the easiest state, and they changed their rules, and now they're on the hard end. So I don't know about Colorado. Vermont, we've been on it in the past. I don't know if we're currently on it. Vermont, so New England, they tend to be states where you kind of have to redo it every cycle. I don't think that Vermont is. I don't think we can do Vermont yet. It's my recollection. You know, Arkansas was done really early because they changed their law, but we got in before they changed it. And then there are a couple other states like, you know, Mississippi and Hawaii and a few others where you can go ahead and get it done at this point. But you know, we're hoping to do better than we did in 2020. You know, we do fairly well in write-ins. You know, we're actually, I think, the best write-in party that's in the third party space.
How many did you get on in 2020?
Write-in votes specifically, I don't know. We got a little bit less than 40,000 in total, though. You know, that's, you know, when you're doing write-ins, like for instance in Harris County in Texas, they counted them but didn't submit them to the state elections office. So we know how many there were, but it's not part of the official count. You know, so about 40,000 nationwide, and I'd say at least 25,000 of those are write-ins, which for a presidential candidate is fairly good. The the Greens and the Libertarians do better than us, and some of the other minor parties do better than us because they have better ballot access in some place like California, for instance.
Mhm.
But write-in wise, we actually get people that will vote for us even if we're not on the ballot.
Do you guys have a chapter in all 50 states?
A formal chapter, no. We have members in all 50 states, but we have sort of different levels of chapters depending on how many people we have and how active they are. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I did, but the reason that I asked, and if I cut you off on the short-term goals, I apologize, but I thought maybe that was a lead into the midterm goals. I
Yeah.
thought maybe, expanding your chapter base would be
Yeah.
something you guys were looking for.
Yeah, so we may be able to do it in 2024, but I think we're really looking at 2026. Nobody has actually achieved party status with the Federal Election Commission since the Greens did it in the early 2000s. And to do that, you've got to run 16 congressional candidates in 8 different states, and they have to raise a certain amount of money or spend a certain amount of money. And that's a medium-term goal. We may be able to pull it off this cycle, but I think we're concluded it's going to be 2026. And that opens up the doors on a lot of different things. States like Florida, for instance, if you're not recognized by the FEC, you don't get to run a candidate for president. So if you get that recognition, it gets you on the ballot in more places. It also changes up how you can coordinate between your campaigns at the various levels and how your state parties can coordinate with the national party and all the rest of it. So it's important for getting over the legal hurdles that the government and the 2 major parties have put in our way.
Do you know off the top of your head some of the states that you might be missing chapters where, you'd either want to do fundraising or get candidates or whatever the case is, so that maybe in 2026 it makes your life a little easier?
We do have some states that we're targeting specifically for that purpose. They tend to be, they have to have certain requirements, right? They have to be fairly easy to put congressional candidates on the ballot, but they have to be on the ballot with our party name next to them. And there's a lot of New England states, and then just sort of weird states like Kentucky you would never think of, but they are. And then if we get this Florida thing sorted out, the Florida makes it fairly easy for you to register as a party, but then in order to run as a candidate, they have to be registered with that party for at least a year before they file, which as a practical matter means that you essentially have to be registered 2 years before they the actual election. And so we missed that cutoff this cycle. So Florida is a big state for us that we think we're going to run quite a few candidates in. But even places like Mississippi, right? They got 4 congressional seats, just $500 to get somebody on the ballot in each of those states. So really we can use help all across the country, even in the territories. We did fairly well in Guam last cycle. So anybody who's listening to this show that wants to help out, we can find you something to do.
Okay, that's fair. So do you have more midterm goals, or do you want to jump to the long-term stuff?
I have certain goals. I don't know that there's a formal party vision for 2026, 2028. Long term, our sort of mission is, we are sort of relying on religiously motivated voters, activists, and donors to get us the ballot access and the party infrastructure and build it out in all 50 states. And then the idea is then we have to make alliances and actually build a coalition that can actually win elections. And that's sort of the long-term goal is where do we go beyond the 1% or 2% that we think we can get just with our sort of niche that we currently occupy. That's the sort of the long-term strategy.
Okay. Well, like Jack said, if there are any listeners out there that like what the American Solidarity Party has said so far, and you want to reach out, we'll give you that info at the end of the show.
So when I listen to you talk about these structural hurdles that you have to keep negotiating every time you even want to engage in the process, I just wonder, like, and question number 7, what would you change in the current political process to make things better for, voters, candidates, and parties, as it relates to the American Solidarity Party, so that you'd have the potential to, maybe find like a breakthrough candidate or have a space to where you could, utilize it more without such a battle.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we as a party think we can eventually win under the current system because we draw fairly evenly from both the major parties. But we certainly would like to change it up for the people that come in the future. I'm a fan of proportional representation. It's in our platform as something we like. It's more common in Europe and Latin America, where parties like ours are more successful, and you just get more choices presented to the voters under such a system. But there's all sorts of obstacles that are out there. The campaign finance rules are stacked against new parties. The ballot access rules are stacked against new parties. The media landscape is stacked against new parties. And public funding of campaigns, easier ballot access rules. There's just a lot of things that could be changed to improve it, and we're generally in agreement with most minor parties on on those matters.
I've got to tell you, Jack, I just looked at the clock and we're only like 30 minutes into this interview. This has been the most efficient use of our time so far. And I don't know if that's because you're just so succinct or what's going on, but we blew through those things. And I even interrupted you 3 or 4 times.
So, well, I'm a lawyer that bills by the hour, so clients don't like me to talk too long.
Can I ask you just this is a little bit more, so like in 2022 there was sort of a rhetorical disposition that was behind what was going on when I was reading a lot of the different what people are anticipating with regards to Senate outcomes, House Representative outcomes. Roe v. Wade goes down right before that election, and everyone sort of thought there was going to be this big red wave. And it seems like on some level it's always hard to say what it was that actually like caused it in that moment, but it really looked like the Democrats were going to get lambasted, and they held on to the Senate, and they lost the House by only a few seats. I know that pro-life is a very strong position inside the American Solidarity Party. If you really are going to have the ability to penetrate that space, how do you anticipate that factor fitting in when I mean if in fact that the reason why the Dems held on to so much of their position was because of the outcome of that specifically, particularly when you listen to like polling on the Republican side, and pro-life is not as significant or not as mathematically an important topic as it was maybe in the 80s or in the 90s.
Well, I mean, I think you're looking at it from a two-party approach, right? In the sense that what do Republicans actually get votes on? It's the pro-life issue, right? So we're taking a chunk of their voters, right? We tend to take from the Democrats folks that want universal health care, that care about economic justice or the environment and the like, right? So it's just a different electoral calculation than what currently exists, right? I mean, the Democrats have been consolidating the educated college educated vote, right? And which historically was Republican, but has moved to the Democrats, and some of the things that they moved on are social issues, right?
Mhm.
You know, that's what you were seeing in that election. And you know, we do well with educated religious folks. That's the big chunk of our party, but we also do very well with working class folks. And you know, I think that our coalition is very viable because we're taking the bigger, we appeal to the big voting blocks of the current major parties, right? Well, we're not, we can harm them both. Unlike a lot of minor parties that appeal to one or the other, and or a segment of one of the parties, we attract a broader cross section.
I have to say that when I was listening to the debate, like I actually was pretty impressed in a lot of the discussions. You know, the economic discussions. You talked about the too big to fail stuff. You talked about East Palestine. You talked about. I mean, because obviously, in spite of what any rhetorical dispositions are with regards to like the existing labor relations board, which is better than it's been in the past. Everything that I see the Democratic Party doing right now is actually alienating labor. So on some level, I totally agree with your point with regards to being able to pull from the left. But a lot of the people that I know in those spaces are going to have a hard time overcoming the space with regards to pro-life. And that's the only reason why I ask it, because there's no doubt, like some of the rhetoric that's even coming out of the debate was, I mean, I don't try to talk about this because I'm just trying to interview people here. I don't want to give up but I'm sort of an old Marxist. And when I was listening to what was being said, there was some Marxist language that was being used by people that were talking about things in there. And I appreciated that. So.
Well, I mean, historically, the pro-life position was the progressive position, right? If you like, for instance, corporations today would be more than happy to pay for abortion, but they hate to pay for maternity care, right? It's just a lot cheaper to get rid of the problem.
It is, yeah.
Right. And, our respect for life, is sort of all encompassing, and we can't really cut out the unborn piece, right? A respect for the sanctity of human life is a key component of what we're about. And I think if you actually want to construct a better world, you can't be comfortable with hundreds of thousands of women feeling the need to kill their children every year to make it through life, right? You can't be okay with that. And I'm not. I understand that in many circles in the contemporary left, our abortion position is just a non-starter for them. But I think that many people in the contemporary left fail to realize how much they've alienated the folks that are pro-life, right? I mean, that's a big chunk of why our party exists, is because there are a lot of us out there. Like, I mean, I was a greenie for a while, back I voted for Nader. But I mean, I'm not welcome in that party. And there are a lot of places on the left where if you're pro-life or have traditional views on sexuality, you're just not welcome. In fact, you're sort of a pariah. And I think it's a problem for the left because you guys have, you or we have cut ourselves off from the institutional support. I mean, Cesar Chavez or Saul Alinsky, I mean, all this, the civil rights movement, where did these folks draw their actual base of support? It was from the churches. And, if you've got the churches and you've got labor, right? And labor's stuck with the Democrats. They would love, I mean, certainly your rank and file folks would love to escape the Democrats, but they can't take the risk of the Republicans winning, right? So the only people that have the actual freedom to, the freedom in the institutions and, the support to create a left-leaning party on are religious folks. right? We've got universities, we've got hospitals, we've got, all sorts of nonprofits and civic engagement groups. And you go to any major city and you've got, a whole bunch of churches working on a variety of social problems. And, I think that people are going to be surprised in 5 to 10 years about where our party actually gets, and I think that people will come around. I think that will force an adjustment of the dialogue in this country, particularly amongst folks that are on the left.
So in adjusting the dialogue, I've got a couple of more quick questions, but the answer may be longer. So when you were explaining the party's position on pro-life, you said we are pro-life in, the big picture. I think you mentioned the death penalty at the beginning of the show, and then just now you mentioned unborn children. But then you said it's a problem if thousands of women just want to get rid of their unborn child. Well, or that they're okay with it. I've just real quick, because I've known a couple of women that have had them in the past, and they were not okay with it. It broke them up, but they knew that they didn't have the financial resources to take care of it at the time, and they knew that it was going to essentially be an unwanted child.
Yep.
So how can we get over that hump? Because I think ultimately, if I want to go get a nose job, I can get a nose job. So why can't someone who doesn't want to put someone that may be harmed into this world? I think that's more beneficial than a nose job, in my opinion. Sorry, I'm not trying to beat up on you. I'm just trying to get a better idea of the position.
Well, I mean, so I want to make my position clear, right? I think that there are hundreds of thousands of abortions every year. And I think a lot of those abortions, the mother would prefer not to do it, but they don't feel like they have an actual choice, right? Because of their financial situation and their healthcare access or the like, right? And as a party, we believe that we have paternity care paid for by the government, right? We believe that we want a comprehensive reform of how healthcare is done, right? We believe in social supports for families and for caretakers and all of those sort of things, much more so than you would see in, say, the Democratic Party. We love the child care credits, right? All the things the Democrats and Biden promised that they didn't deliver on, and in fact cut back on what had been done before. We're the opposite of that. We want to see families succeed, and we're fans of adoption too, right? We'd love to see mothers give birth, and if they don't want to take care of their child, there's plenty of parents out there that would love the child. So where we probably can't agree is on whether it should be legal or not. We think that if you allow something to be, it's similar to our view on euthanasia, right? If you give people the choice to die with dignity, then the social pressure to die will be extraordinarily high, because it's much cheaper for old people just to be killed than to be cared for. And you see that in Canada, where they're trying to push people in that direction. So if you don't have a legal prohibition on it, people are going to take or society is going to push people into tough choices where they have no good options. And the option of abortion is oftentimes best for society and not the best choice for the mother. And certainly the worst choice for the child.
That's fair. I just, one more quick follow up on that, and then I'll leave you alone on pro-life, pro-choice. So I'm assuming that you guys want to make abortions illegal across the board. Now, the question actually is is that because of the fact that you are all Christian Democrats, or is it for the betterment of the globe?
I mean, we would say both, right? I mean, certainly a key component of Christianity has been don't kill people. But, we think that respect for life and the care of the human person is best for everybody. We think that the way people are treated in this country, the disposability of humans is not just the unborn, right? I mean, adults are treated that way too. The lack of respect for the elderly in our society is atrocious, and the conditions of the homeless is atrocious. I mean, there's not a respect for the human person really anywhere in our politics.
Yeah, everything's a number right now, to be sure. It's everything in the abstract. It's not concrete.
So I think our approach to valuing human beings is good for the world.
I think there is an interesting kind of continuity in what you're talking about, because there's no doubt that the way that you talk about changing foreign policy, you're talking about trying to create community, and yeah, I got some thinking to do, but it's interesting. There is an interesting continuity to it. So
yeah, the language we typically use is the consistent ethic of life. And it's not just what we use, it's a common thinking, and it's part of a 2,000-year-old intellectual tradition in our system. So,
well, and this might not be very intellectual, but now I've got another follow-up question, and that is, well, you know what? I was going to ask a question about overpopulation and the environment, and
sure.
if you guys had considered that, but I don't know. I feel like I'm just harping on stuff that doesn't need to be harped on, because I mean, you said you're an attorney, so it's been asked and answered.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about it. You may want to listen to Brian Check. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's the Center for Sustainable Economy. He's a big believer in sort of limiting population growth. But he actually came and spoke to our national convention. So his video is on the party YouTube channel. You may want to check that out if that's
I actually made a reference to him in the debate that I listened to, if I remember correctly.
Is it C8? It's not CHECK, is it?
Well, his name is Check, CZECH. So Brian Check, and then Cassie, and I'm blanking on what it stands for. Center for Advancement of the Steady State Economy, I think.
Okay.
So, but it is something we take into consideration, right? I mean, it's not we're not necessarily fans of unlimited growth, right? But we also, think that the human life is extremely important, right? And I think that everyone can be provided for adequately if we actually make the effort as a society to do so.
So since you do have a tendency to lean right a little bit as far as certain social issues, is birth control out of the question with the American Solidarity Party, or is birth control okay as long as we're not doing abortions?
Yeah, so the party has no position on birth control. This is actually an area where Protestants and Catholics tend to disagree. So, we don't agree amongst ourselves on this. So, there's certainly folks that think birth control is bad, but there isn't really any impetus in the party to do anything to ban it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I just wanted to help the listeners get a better picture, because I mean, if we can do one and not the other, then it might be okay. I don't know if it is or isn't, but
yeah, I'm not a woman, so I'd rather just leave it in somebody else's hands at that point. So
yeah. So I promised that you'd get to make a statement about the American Solidarity Party and why the listeners want to, come your way and give you a vote. Do you have a statement prepared or? Okay.
I can talk. The lawyers can talk. But I'm happy to answer any questions if there's anything else you wanted to ask. If not, I can give a closing statement. Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm good. Yeah. What kind of law do you practice? Just as a side note.
So I do, business litigation pays the bills, but I do, quite a bit of sort of pro bono or public interest work as well. I've done a lot of Voting Rights Act stuff, Open Meetings Act, Open Records, and some civil rights stuff, and so I find that working in the courtroom is a lot more effective than working in partisan politics.
You actually go somewhere, yeah, on some level.
You can actually do something good.
Unless you're like, do you know who Steven Donziger is?
I've heard the name.
Yeah, he won a huge against an oil company down in I think it was Ecuador, like billions and billions of dollars won, and the oil company totally neutralized everything. So sometimes the stuff that happens in courtrooms is effective. Sometimes the money machine that you go against can be staggering, but I'm going away now.
Yeah, it's still hard to get justice in the courtroom, but at least you're trying to convince a smaller group of people rather than trying to convince the entire public to change direction. So the American Solidarity Party, I think that it's the most promising of the minor parties that are out there today. We draw people from both parts of the political spectrum. We draw people that are highly educated. We draw people that have no college education at all. When we were looking to field presidential candidates, 75% of our membership was not eligible to run because they weren't old enough. We're a very young party, and that bodes well for the future. We've got avenues and institutions that we are building relationships with that other minor parties don't have the same types of connections. There are religiously motivated people doing all sorts of great things right now that can no longer in good conscience support either of the two major parties, and they've been looking for a home, and we're providing them one. We're seeing growth that we're really, I think, sometimes the Ford Party claims to be growing faster than us, but I don't know if that's true. They've never really actually run a candidate, so it's hard to say. We're seeing real growth. If you're somebody who lives online, check out your Christian circles, and you'll hear us pop up when politics is discussed. We get good press in Catholic sources and the Protestant sources. And those are sources that you may not see in the mainstream, but they are sources that matter to large communities of people. Our presidential nominee, Peter Sonsky, he's a member of the Knights of Columbus. It's a 1 million member organization all across the country that has a life insurance program that was started as sort of a cooperative. If folks on this, I think that this tends to be more a left-leaning audience. We've got people that are actually going out there and doing things. Whether it's racial justice or economic justice or environmental justice, you will find religiously motivated folks doing that type of work. And if you've spent time in left circles, like I have, you tend to run across sort of circular firing squads and purity tests and the like. We just don't really have that in our party because we have, people with deeply held religious convictions that don't always agree with each other. And, we recognize that there are more important things than politics. And that, allows for political dialogue to be far more rational and organized, and we can build real coalitions. So I would encourage people to check out our party and to get involved. At the very least, sign up for our email lists and, get updates on what's going on in your locality. And if we're running a candidate, give us a thought.
And
So,
you guys are at American-solidarity.org, right?
So it's solidarity-party.org. I mean, just put American. Yeah, just put American Solidarity Party in Google and you'll find us. Thank you all for having me on your show. I appreciate the interview and I appreciate you all bringing attention to minor parties.
I didn't mean to cut you off that last time, Jack. I just wanted to make sure and get the address in before I forgot. If you've got something else to say, go ahead.
Oh no, I think I've said enough.
Okay.
Thank you, Jack.
Thanks for joining, and I will post this to X as soon as I get it converted, and I'll put at AM Solidarity. I think that's your address. So you should see it coming through if you're the guy that monitors your digital stuff.
I am not. If you could actually just email it to me, a link, I will pass it along to the folks to make sure they're paying attention.
Okay. Thanks a bunch.
Have a good night, sir.
Have a good night.
Bye.